What is going on, everybody? My name is Austin Prevo, and I'm your host of the PV National Podcast. And welcome to episode 3 of our 5 series for our 5-episode educational series. So today we're going to be going over why 70% of solar organizations, whether they're sales organizations or actual solar construction companies, go out of business. We're going to discuss the red line model and some of those flaws. We're going to discuss dealer fees and finance charges, and a little bit of manipulation from the finance companies to consumers. We're going to go over the lack of regulation and pricing transparency, and then ultimately how these factors together lead to bankrupt installers and stranded homeowners. So we're just going to get right into this, okay? So like I said a second ago, the statistics are really it's 70% of solar organizations either do a couple things. They file for bankruptcy, and whenever a company decides to file for bankruptcy, there's 2 different ways they can go. They can go a Chapter 11 or a Chapter 7. And I'll give 2 examples really quickly of what specific companies did which. So Solar Mosaic, which is a finance company, filed Chapter 11. Basically, what that means is that it's an internal restructure on their book of business, who's going to be the holder of these notes, investment pools, all this different kind of stuff. So it's not shut its doors, right? Let's say, for example, Titan Solar, one of the largest residential solar installers in like solar installation history. They did, I think, over 100,000 residential solar installs in their tenure. They filed Chapter 7. They completely shut their doors, no restructure, and that has left home. And Titan was an installer, so a warranty service provider, all that different kind of stuff, and they shut their doors. Pink Energy, Solcia, Sunpro, ADT, Sunpro and ADT merged. Then they filed for bankruptcy. And there are hundreds of smaller installers that just simply shut their doors. Didn't file for bankruptcy, Chapter 7 or Chapter 11 with the state. They just simply shut their doors because they no longer could operate. This has had such a massive impact on customer experience when it comes to solar. These warranties that are being provided by the installers of these systems, so like Titan, Sunpro, all these different companies that filed for bankruptcy and shut their doors, had anywhere between a 5 to 25 year labor warranty. And I'm going to break that down. I know in a couple episodes ago, I think on the first episode, we broke down what an actual solar warranty is and kind of what the implications are of those. So we have labor and you have manufacture, okay? So when these companies go out of business, the manufacturer warranty stays intact. So all the panels, inverters, all the equipment that's on the house, those are still intact. But the issue is that whenever these companies go out of business and homeowners are stranded, they bought a system that had a warranty attached to the purchase. And no homeowner in any right mind would pay for a system that's supposed to last them 25 years if a 25-year warranty was going to be either voided or lost. And so these homeowners don't have anywhere to turn to liaison, even though their manufacturer warranties are still intact. They don't know who to call to liaison manufacturer warranty claims. They don't know the proper channels through Enphase. They don't know the proper channels through SolarEdge. SolarEdge is actually not talking to any homeowners right now. They are only talking to installers. So if you're a homeowner and you've got SolarEdge, and you don't have anybody to help if an inverter goes down or half your system goes down or whatever it may be, you have no recourse unless you find a qualified licensed installer to help you liaison that process. And as you can imagine, if your warranty is gone and your service provider is gone, you just spent a bunch of money and it's really turned into a headache. And we have seen this over and 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 over again inside our business the last 6 years. The the overwhelming lack of customer service. Obviously, if a company's gone out of business, it really makes a homeowner nervous. It makes a lot of the times homeowners feel duped. They feel like they've been taken advantage of in certain scenarios. But I just wanted to touch on like a little bit of like the Texas installer collapse, because that's the market in which we operate in. So many people, whenever we get calls from roofing contractors, like I said, 70% of the time, they don't have a service provider. So they're a little bit leery on who they're going to choose to perform all repairs, because they want to make sure that they only have a manufacturer warranty left if a company's out of business. And they want to make sure that whoever touches that system is not going to avoid that manufacturer warranty. And roofers and GCs, you guys need to be really careful as far as that stuff goes too. Choosing who's going to work on your roof, what kind of warranties they've got, are they licensed, are they insured? And we've talked about that in the past. So next, we're going to move on to kind of how a red line model works and why it is really, really not a good situation for the end user, the homeowner, okay? So in a red line model, basically, and I explained this on the whiteboard last week, when you've got a solar sales organization that partners with an EPC, okay, EPC gives solar sales organization a red line. Basically, what all that means is that sales organization knows what the EPC is going to charge them at cost to do the job, to order the materials, to procure everything, to permit everything, to install, to get inspection, to get it to PTO, basically to handle the whole installation process when it comes to putting solar on someone's house. Here's where it gets really tricky. And I'm going to kind of tie a couple different sections in on this particular point when it comes to red line models, okay? One is that the red line model does not incentivize sales organizations for quality. It only incentivizes sales organizations for profit. It is a race to the bottom, or it used to be. This is not really how the models are working right now. Everyone's going to lease agreements. Everyone's going to PPAs. Everyone's moving away from the traditional loan to, a finance to own type of scenario, okay? Now, here's what's happened. EPCs are now in a race to the bottom to try to compete to get sales inside their business. If you've got an EPC over here that charges, let's just say $2.15 a watt to do all the things I just described, PTO, connection, all that different kind of stuff, install, permitting, blah, blah, blah. Then you have a guy over here or a company over here that's going to do it for $1.95. And they're promising the same things. So what do you think that sales organization is going to choose on who they're going to install their product with? Because this is where it's a problem, is that there are no pricing standard or regulations that are put in place when it comes to solar, okay? It's like back in the 60s and 70s, right? I don't know exactly when the cutoff time is, but I know at some point earlier when automobiles were being sold, there was no manufacturer suggested retail price on automobiles. So one lot could try to get you to buy a Buick Skylark for $5,000, and then down the road you've got all the hoop and the holler and the big TV ads and all that different kind of stuff. That guy's trying to sell you the same car for $15,000. Okay, it took until and consumers were getting taken advantage of, all that different kind of stuff, and that also, and then obviously at some point government came in and said, okay, hey, you have to have a manufacturer suggested retail price so consumers can have some sort of baseline understanding about what something should cost. Nothing like that exists in the solar in the solar purchasing when you're purchasing solar, okay? So you've got sales organization who's trying to drive the price down of these EPCs so that they can basically just name their price when it comes to installing solar to maximize the difference from what they're paying on the install to what they're charging the homeowner, okay? And that is where all this kind of starts, on the way over inflation of pricing, to where homeowners just simply at certain dollar amounts will never, ever, ever, ever see a return on their investment. Once you start getting in the $4, $4.50, I've seen stuff sold at $6 a watt, which is double what anyone should reasonably pay for a solar system to be installed. Maybe getting up to $3.25, somewhere around there per kilowatt is fair. But depending on, what size the roof is, what the pitch is, there are some other factors that you have to put into play if they need a main service panel upgrade, all that different kind of stuff. But this is where the problem started. Way over inflating pricing, okay, to where homeowners were never going to get their investment back. They were never going to get an ROI. And here's where and then that goes into my next thing of why so many of these installers were going out of business. When you're an EPC and you're basically in competition and it's a race to the lowest price you could possibly offer a sales organization to install their product that they're trying to sell to the homeowner, that creates a lot of different trickle-down issues. Whenever an EPC at our solar construction company, I'll say, is advertising to a sales organization, they're supposed to be advertising basically an in-house controllable solution to installing solar. Here's where the red line model screwed everything up. Everything on the EPC started getting subcontracted out to cut cost. And the biggest one where they can cut cost is the labor of actually installing the system. If you were, let's just say for Titan, for example, I know I'm not going to say their name, but I know there was a guy that I know that I linked up with a couple years back who was Titan's national subcontractor director. Basically what that meant was that Titan was subcontracting all their installs out. So they're already Titan is the installer. They're already getting squeezed out to try to get fed deals from their sales partners. And then they're farming out all of their installations while trying to uphold, because homeowners are signing a Titan contract. So if you're signing a Titan contract, but it's installed by all these other different companies, think about what a nightmare that is if Titan has the contract from the homeowner, Titan subcontracts out the install to ABC Solar Company. That homeowner who signed the contract says, hey, my solar's not working. Now Titan has to do one of two things. One, allocate internal resources to go fix the issue, or try to track down the person who actually did the install to try to have that company uphold any warranties that they provided to Titan. So over time, what would happen is all these subcontracted out companies would start, their work was not checked. They would fail inspections. They would not get systems to permission to operate. All the while, the sales organizations are still funneling hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of deals to Titan. And so at some point, when all these subcontractors are not responding and they're not going out and fixing work, and they're having to take their internal resources away from new jobs and put them to old jobs to get them up to running, then all of a sudden you've got a robbing Peter to pay Paul scenario. And you do that long enough, with all these deals that are being funneled, you eventually grow yourselves into debt. And that's exactly what happened with Titan. They got way too big for their britches. Their quality was terrible. And they had to go back on so many of their installs that they just simply could not keep up and had to shut the doors. Okay. That is how that worked. And so that is the same old song and dance of how all of these solar companies go out of business. for the most part. Some of them have different reasons, but overarching, that is what has happened when all these companies go out of business. Now we haven't even gotten into the financing agreement. That is where things get really, really tricky for homeowners. And ultimately, where unfortunately, who carries the burden of these really, really bad financial agreements? It is two parties, okay? One is the homeowner and two is the installer. The sales organization does not burden any of the responsibility of what's called a dealer fee, which I'm about to explain to you. The installer inherently kind of has the burden of responsibility, both. Mainly it's the homeowner, but also the installer does as well. So I'm going to explain what a dealer fee is, okay? A dealer fee is a flat percentage rate in which a finance company is going to charge you for taking out a loan. Essentially, all that dealer fees are in the solar game are if a homeowner, let's just say use round numbers, okay? And back when these loans, these solar loans originated back in like 2014, 15, and 16, somewhere around in that range, dealer fees were aggressive, but they weren't like, in my opinion, criminal, okay? Started off where they're about 10% of total loan amount as a fee, undisclosed to the consumer, disguised as what's called seller's points. I think they're finance charges, but our government doesn't see it that way. So it allows companies like Mosaic and Good Leap and all these giant organizations to just basically arbitrarily charge homeowners an exorbitant amount of money to originate the loan without having to disclose it to them. It started off back in 2016, 2015, around 7 to 10%. So to use round numbers, if you took out a $10,000 loan, you would be charged $1,000, or the finance company would take $1,000 off the top, and then the installer would have $9,000 to work with on their install, not $10,000, $9,000 to work with on their install, and get their pricing accordingly. And the homeowner would bear the responsibility of paying that extra $1,000 on top of an interest rate, okay? Over time, which finance companies did not plan for this, and this is exactly what's happened. Finance companies and companies like Titan are in bed together, okay? Titan understands what these dealer fees are, how it all works. Here's the kicker. Finance companies along the way did not account for how many of these solar companies like Titan were going to go out of business. So at some point, the 10% and the low interest rate is not enough, because obviously when consumers would call and say, hey, my company's been out of business, my system's not working right, all this different kind of stuff, and threatening, hey, we're either not going to pay or you fix it, all of a sudden a finance company becomes inherently a service company. So these finance companies are having to find local vendors, go out, fix stuff, and their original amounts of their dealer fees and their interest rates was simply not enough to cover how much of O&M that they've had to take care of to keep the loans good and people continuing to pay. So these dealer fees I've seen upwards of 40%. As a homeowner, would you ever take out a loan where you had an interest rate of, let's just say, 2.99%, and a finance company, if you took out a $100,000 loan, would you pay a financing company $40,000 to originate the loan? My guess is no. Right? It's not a straight up loan. They do not disclose it to their consumers. All these proposal tools, all this different kind of stuff. And it has caused so many problems inside of the solar business, because now at this point, Titan is saying, hey, we're going to sell you a $100,000 system, but as Titan, they only get funded $60,000. So that means the salesman has to add in the dealer fee, add in the sales commission. Then Titan gets the contract and they've got to install essentially a $100,000 system for $60,000. So where does that lead, right? It leads to so many different things, but essentially all those little factors is what leads to an industry that is completely imploded. And not to mention all of the really, really terrible, I mean, we cannot forget the insanely terrible sales tactics and unethical ways that this product was being peddled to vulnerable consumers. 75 to 80% of solar installs were sold to either elderly, English second language, or low income households. Because where the sales pitch appealed to is people on fixed income trying to lower their monthly expenses because they're on a fixed income. Or lower income houses where a lot of people are just trying to find ways to save money in this country. And salesmen, they preyed on that. They jacked up the pricing and they just got people to sign contracts. Please don't think for 1 second that it's the big bad finance companies or the big bad solar installers that are culpable for this. It is a few different things. Now, don't get me wrong. Did Titan and these giant organizations, did they allow for really unethical sales practices? Of course, because they wanted to funnel deals through. Do the giant finance companies, do I think they were completely negligent and willfully negligent? I do. But there's no regulation. There's no one that says you can't charge more than, you can't charge, okay, if you're going to get a 10 kilowatt system installed on your house, you shouldn't pay any more than $32,500. People were selling 10 kilowatt systems for $60,000, $65,000, $70,000. And the homeowner's never going to see a return on investment on that. So I'm hoping that I kind of painted a general picture of how this kind of stuff has worked. And I think really where we're going to end this podcast and end this educational is really that, okay? Poor workmanship, lack of accountability, bad reviews, cash flow collapse because you got all these deals that never got permission to operate, that aren't working properly, and they had to rob Peter to pay Paul, and eventually everyone knows where that ends. And no oversight on regulation, on how to protect consumers from bad companies. Solar companies, they implode under financial pressure, they strand projects, and it has completely lost consumer trust on what solar can be, okay? Undoubtedly, everyone asks me this all the time, is solar worth it? And I say, absolutely, solar is worth it. And there's one kicker, really. There's two main kickers. One is it's sold at the right price. It's very simple. It's not much more complicated than that. Everyone wants to way overcomplicate solar. Is it sold at a fair price? Where within the next 7 to 10 years, if you're in more of a long-term investment home, is it going to be worth it at this price? And two, what kind of service agreements do homeowners have? Those are the two main kickers, price and service agreements. It's not that complicated. Solar could have been, even on the loan model, if finance companies would have vetted their installs better, if they would have paid more attention to how many solar companies are going out of business, because don't think for a second that these finance companies, there were only a few major players, Infin, Dividend, Solar Mosaic, Good Leap, and those are some major players. There's some smaller finance companies that do it, but you don't think that they knew the turnover rate of solar installers? That's why their dealer fees had to jack up, over almost 5x in a 10-year period to originate the loans, because they knew they had exposure on the back end because all these companies were going out of business. So, if you are considering buying solar, right? Just remember this: $3.25 a kilowatt is fair. That is a fair price. Anything over 350, they're gouging you. And I would 1000% recommend, if you're looking to buy solar, you've got to do your research on who you're hiring. You've got to do your research on that. Do not be swindled by a door knocker. Do your own research. Get people out to give you proposal tools. And I would 1000% opt out of third-party financing that any one of these companies is going to give you. There are a couple companies who, I think there's a bank in Texas called Climate First, I believe, and they offer a straight-up loan. It's like $1,000 origination fee with like a 6.75% interest. It's a straight-up loan. So really do your research on the financing and do your research on the pricing. Okay, make sure someone's not coming to try to take advantage of you. One sales rep, I went to an event the other day, and off one deal, one sales rep made $32,000 off of one residential deal. That's a problem. I don't care what you're doing. You do not. Now, obviously, in the roofing business, it's a little bit different. You're doing a $10 million home special, all this different kind of stuff. Absolutely. Commissions of that level are warranted and deserved if you're taking on projects of that size. But no residential solar system should anyone make $32,000. Should never happen. That is quite literally money that you should not have spent, and that should be in your pocket. So pricing, how you're financing, best way to do it is just throw cash at it. If you're in a long-term investment home and you could pay cash, find a way to pay cash. And solar, 1,000% is worth it. And the agreements that you have with service, making sure your service is where it needs to be, because these products, they do go bad, and you need someone who understands how to liaison that manufacturer warranty process for you, so that you're not skipping beats. You're not 2, 3, 4, 5 months without any solar production. And so, yeah, I think that is going to be just kind of the overarching. I just wanted to get a few points across and do some basic education on why this stuff is happening. And I think we did that today. So, obviously, like, comment, subscribe on our YouTube channel. We're just kind of getting started. We're really rough in the podcast game. I've got a couple really exciting stuff coming up, and not on episode 4, but episode 5. We're going to be having Zach Sasser out. He's one of the partners at Lone Star Exteriors, and he has basically become the solar detach and reset monster. He is the number one individual guy that brings us business on detach and reset, so y'all guys stay tuned for that. Look for the next one. Thanks, guys.